I'm John. Welcome. It is not quite dark outside, but we are nonetheless going to be embracing the night here, and we have a great crowd to do that with, including a secret surprise guest who is joining us on the far end of the panel here. But starting out to my left, Mr. Mark Rein-Hagen. We'll go into what all these guys have done quite a bit, but obviously Mark was one of the people behind Lion Rampant originally, behind Vampire, The World of Darkness, all of that. Then Lisa Stevens. Again, I feel like, how do I introduce these people, right? This is Lisa as well, one of the original principals behind Lion Rampant, but then White Wolf, but then Wizards, and now Paizo, and one of the secret masters of gaming, I would say.
That's not so secret.
Ancient system of the game. That's what we call it.
That's right.
Yep.
We established that earlier.
Established that earlier.
And people, I can now see who is on the other side. Richard, hello. Richard Thomas, who one of the people who really generated the incredible look behind all of this stuff. And Stephen Weick. Is it Weick? Weick? Weick. Okay,
Like
Stephen Weick.
Let the candle burning from both ends.
That's right. Early principal of White Wolf and president, right, of White Wolf. And then finally, Nicole Lindros, who is joining us as well, who I am very pleased to see here. So, please, big hand for the panel. What?
Thank you.
Would you like? You may introduce yourself if you'd like a better introduction.
I could have given you more details.
Hey, everybody, it's Nicole.
It's funny. It's fine.
So, thank you all for coming. And again, we're going to talk a lot about the genesis of White Wolf and again, the activities of Lion Rampant and how all that helped to make Gen Con what it is and how Gen Con helped to make those games and those companies what they were. But up front, I did want to turn this over to Steve, since recently one of the people who would have been fantastic to have here talking about this, unfortunately could no longer be here to talk to us.
Yeah, sure. Maybe some of you have already heard that my brother Stuart died this summer. And when you look at the origin of White Wolf, the origin is sort of a two-part origin because you have Nicole and Lisa and Mark starting from the Lion Rampant half, and you have my brother and I and Rich starting from the what was already called White Wolf half. And so it is a little bit odd to be up on the panel here. This would have been Stuart's first return trip to Gen Con in a while. It would have been great to have him here. But his presence, his lack of presence here is felt. It's something that he was such an instrumental part of all of this for so many years. He was, most of you would know him for his work on Mage, being the principal of that. But really, he was the instigator of all of this, and to me at least, in the sense that he came up to me one day at high school, we were in high school, and he says, "Hey Steve, let's start a magazine." I'm like, okay. And we started White Wolf magazine, and it wasn't much to begin with, but Stuart is the type of guy that always had a vision. He was always an optimist, and he had a quiet perseverance to him. He just knew that something should be done, and therefore we're going to go out and do it, and nothing would get in the way. And so a lot of what we accomplished at White Wolf as a group is due to sort of that drive that he instilled in the company. And so I think it was just nice to acknowledge that we miss him and wish he were here.
I'm hoping actually that in the course of this thing you'll see what a pivotal role he played. I mean, he actually had a key decision in this whole saga that was his decision, and without it, we probably wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
Well, and it might help to start out by teeing up why you would start a magazine about games. So we got to roll back the clock here, right? It's 1986. There are people who have modems and they go beep beep boop boop and things like that, but there's no practicable internet you could use at the time. So who were the people that started gaming fanzines? Kind of what was that culture like at the time? And I throw that out to whoever would like to speak to it. But
Well, I can just speak for ourselves in a little bit, which is that I think anybody, if you're ever thinking about writing, you know, there's that huge step between thinking about writing and actually doing it. And Stuart was the type who would just cross that line without thinking about it twice, whereas a lot of people, including maybe myself, were like, well, I don't know, can I do this or not? Stuart and I were just any other teenagers role-playing, and we wrote a book. We loved Villains and Vigilantes, among many other games, and we wrote a book for Villains and Vigilantes, and lo and behold, the publisher accepted it. And we're like, what? I guess we're authors now. Wow, we could do. We later found out the publisher would accept every manuscript that came in the door, but we didn't know that. So for us, it was a big boost of confidence, at least for me. And so we got the idea, well, how do we start something ourselves? What can we do? And a magazine is a much more manageable thing, at least initially, to say, well, we can get lots of people contributing. We can cover lots of games. We love all these different games. Let's write a little bit about all of them and put it together.
Well, yeah, and you have friends, your gaming friends.
Exactly.
Dale and
Yes. Yeah. Your high school gaming group. Hey, let's put a magazine together, and it was just easy to start. But in the day before the internet and email, and when modems were still like, I don't think, and frankly, the entire hobby industry was still coming together. I mean, games were mostly sold still in model train shops and hardware stores, and you didn't have the dedicated deluxe game stores that we are so blessed to have in our neighborhoods these days. And so it was all very nascent, very, very beginning at that time still. And so to even say we were as teenagers aware of the fanzine, we weren't. We were just doing our own thing because we wanted to do it.
And yeah, so that's an important distinction. When you say you put together a magazine, describe physically, and if you go to the Lucas Oil Field Museum, you'll see a White Wolf #1
Yes,
there.
you will. Yes.
But describe what you
Right.
actually did, right?
Yeah. So we actually, the very first thing that we almost would have been called another name perhaps, but the very first issue we put together wasn't really hardly ever made. It was called Arcanum. And then like the very next week, TSR released Unearthed Arcana. And we're like, oh no, they'll sue us. So we changed the name based on, of course, what was really Elric, the character we had read books and loved, but we adopted the animal as the mascot anyway. And but our first issues were simply printed out on our home printer, which was pretty basic at the time, the old daisy wheel. And we would go after hours to our high school and use their Xerox machine to Xerox copies of the issue. Yeah, and we didn't even collate them. I mean, we had to come back with piles of each page and hand collate each thing and staple the sides down. And it shows. You can see it at the museum.
Steve, did Stu think, or did you think that you were putting together a fanzine, or was it just one step to rivaling Dragon?
Yes. Well, in fact, what was one of the first art pieces you did for it, Rich?
That's a great piece.
Well, I don't remember. It was definitely mid '86, like maybe October of '86. And of course, like any gamer, I got Dragon, and in the back was this ad for looking for illustrators for this new magazine called White Wolf. And I was like, wow, well, and I didn't really do much with it. And my wife said, "Did you do anything? Did you send it?" Well, no. They just said, well, they won't like it anyway. No, send it. So sent it out to Stu. And what I did was I did a little drawing of a wolf, a white wolf, looming over an extremely beat up and battered dragon. So it's just like you just beat that. And I sent it off to
Subtle.
Subtle metaphor.
my middle name. But Stu thought that was exactly the attitude that he next thing I know, I hear this. This is really wonderful, and could you do this cover? And oh, by the way, now that we put this cover out, this was the next time he contacted me. Our circulation just doubled because they think we're serious about this. We're getting good art.
And what would the circulation have been around that time?
Well, okay.
I'm just trying to give people
Let's
a
say
sense
your
of where you
copy
came
number
from.
one is very rare.
Yes, number one is very rare.
The first issue was probably about 30 copies. 32 copies, something like that. No, around 30 or 40 copies. We worked part-time at a bookstore, and there was one game shop that was about 40 minutes away, and those two shops agreed to sell them on consignment for us. So that was our massive distribution network at the time. When we were at a convention, not Gen Con, but another local show, and a distributor was there who agreed to take 32 copies of one of, and we were like, well, this is the big deal. This is big times.
Do we
A
have
lot
any
of stapling.
staples?
Yeah.
So doubling circulation, just to put it in perspective.
Yes.
Yes. Right.
Sounds
Come
good.
on, to be fair, that would have been going from like 100 to 200 at that
Yes.
point.
Right,
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It
It's
just
on the
kept. Yeah.
presentation.
It kept climbing. So.
And what kind of content was in it? So you were
Yeah.
making some of it. Were articles from other people in it?
Yeah.
What was in it? What were you writing
Well,
about?
going through my brother's estate things recently, I came across a postcard written to my brother by Isaac Asimov because my mother, who was also a science fiction fan, had written in one of the early issues a big sort of biography and review of Isaac Asimov's works, and my brother had sent this copy off to Isaac Asimov. Again, my brother Stuart was always like, well, why wouldn't we do this? Why wouldn't we just go and talk to Robert Pirsig or Isaac Asimov or whoever we
Isaac
want
would
to...
like to see this art.
Of course. So we actually corresponded with him a couple of times, but so he writes back a postcard, thank you very much. But so in the initial, we would do perspectives on authors like Robert E. Howard or Isaac Asimov. So we covered a lot of science fiction and fantasy. And then we just ran the gamut of games, but of course mostly the games we knew and loved. So there's the obligatory D&D adventure in every issue. And then we started later covering a lot of this Ars Magica game, whatever that was.
We're about to get to that. We're about to get to that.
But it was a lot of stuff. Kevin Simbita at Palladium at one point wrote a letter to White Wolf saying, hey, why don't you ever cover Palladium games? And we're like, well, we didn't really play any Palladium games other than Robotech a little, so sorry, Kevin, but, you know. But, so our thought was, though, Dragon is the house organ of the evil overlord, so we should cover everything else as well and not just be a house organ magazine. And so it was just
Well,
a
I haven't
mix.
heard that language in a long time.
I know,
right?
I know, yeah.
House organ.
House
Yeah.
organ.
That's my spleen.
But wasn't there also a mega adventure that you guys had?
Yes. Well, after a while, we expanded beyond just the magazine and did a standalone White Wolf Adventures.
Well, before that though, there's the Curse Undying.
Oh, okay, right. Man.
Smart.
So
Yeah.
meanwhile,
Also-
there was a place I understand it's called Saint Olaf. Is that the
Yes.
the name, right?
Olaf.
Hotbed of
And
insurrection.
I understand that some people were attending school there. Some of them sitting at this table.
Some attending better than others.
Someone's a graduate but refused to leave.
So when did you guys get there, and how did you meet there?
Well, I was a freshman, and Jonathan Tweet was a sophomore, and he was in the dorm next door. And I had by then completely quit role-playing games in favor of girls and cars. But I happened to go through the basement one night, and they were playing RuneQuest, and I walked by the door. Oh, they're role-playing. I'm not gonna go in. I got my snack, walked back, listen, it's role-playing. I'm not gonna go in. Walked back. Third time, I just walked back in and I go, okay, what are you guys playing? And so I became friends with them, and then we met Lisa a short time later. And
I gotta tell that story though, because the story's really funny.
Go ahead.
So I'm running a big D&D campaign at St. Olaf, and it's gotten to be pretty big. People are hearing about it, coming up to me, can I be in, can I be in? And there's these two guys, Glenn Elliott and Jim Flanders, were at the time were playing in Mark was running a RuneQuest game in Harn, and they decided these guys wanted to play in my game, and so I played on. I was playing Friday and Saturday nights, and so they leave the game, and one day this guy comes up and he goes, "I hear you're stealing my players." And I'm like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, these two guys, they were in my campaign. Now they won't come play in my campaign because they want to play in your campaign because they say it's so great. I want to come. I don't understand why they do that." And so he asked if he can come and watch my campaign to see what the heck I'm doing that would make these people want to leave. And so I remember we went downstairs and we were down. Actually, we were like in some someone had to do something with some photography thing. And we're playing this, we're in Temple of Elemental Evil, and it was the night that my players decided to hijack the game, and they put one of the players on trial for stealing as a rogue, and they decided to basically put her on trial in the middle of the dungeon, and so the whole thing was just kind of just crazy thing, hijacking off the rails. And Mark was just like, I don't understand why they wouldn't have played this game, and stuff. I remember just like, and so finally we made this agreement where like Mark would run his RuneQuest Hard game, and I played in that, and then Mark rolled up Relipo the Bard in my game and played in my D&D game. We did that for a while until Ars Magica.
Yeah. And then Ars Magica came along, and we started designing, Jonathan and I started designing the game, and Jonathan really wanted TSR to publish it. So I wish we still had this letter, but we wrote a letter to TSR saying, we have a very good game, and you would want to publish it because it's great. And it's just so embarrassing. And we sent it in, and I'm like going, there's no way you're going to answer. So I said to Jonathan, we're going to give them 2 months. If they don't answer, we're starting a company. And then, of course, we didn't get a response. So we started a company. And then we decided, though, we had to get a product out because Gen Con was coming that summer. We couldn't have Ars Magica done by the summer, so we decided, hey, wait a minute, that new Macintosh is coming out, that computer from Apple, and they're going to have desktop publishing. So we said, let's buy the first Mac. So we bought the very first Mac, and then immediately had McPaint. And so everyone started sitting at that computer drawing art on it, and we did the layout for Whimsy cards. And when the school got the very first laser printer, we printed out Whimsy cards. So effectively, we were the very first desktop publisher outside of Apple. because the day that Whimsy printer came out, we printed, and we went straight to the printer. And I remember very clearly, everyone else got bored of collating the cards. So I had a big, huge round table in the dining room. And I just spent hours watching PBS on tape, flipping cards as I walked around the table. And I think I estimated I walked around the table like, 2,000 times. So I still have dreams where I'm walking in this room.
So, but let's not pass over what Whimsy cards are in the story of how they were produced. So Whimsy cards are kind of a fascinating little product. So what kind of things were you experimenting with there at St. Olaf that you thought it would be cool to have? Do people generally know Whimsy cards, or maybe you saw the story path cards that later White Wolf did based on them?
It's just basically an idea that not just the game master, the storyteller, can decide story twists and plot twists. But you gave these cards to players as a reward, or you just give one to every player at the beginning, and the player can hang on to it, and outside of their character, they can say, okay, a strange noise, or a tolling bell, or these things that prompt you to add stuff to the story. So it made role-playing more sort of fluid, and we just wanted to experiment desperately. We wanted to experiment with what role-playing was. We want to do something different and make it more than just dungeon crawling. I think we all felt this passionate sense that role-playing could be more than what it was back then, which is basically everyone played dungeon crawls with a brief, trip through the wilderness,
And I mean, certainly Ars Magica has lots of mechanisms in it as well that similarly, speak to the same point, right?
Yeah, troop-style play,
Precisely.
which I think is still an incredible idea, and I'm shocked has never been done again. It's always.
Could you
So this is where I actually have something to add,
Oh,
if I may.
yeah,
go for it.
Because I came into to Lion Rampant after they'd done Whimsy cards, but and they printed the first edition main book, and they were working on
Broken
refining, Broken Covenant, and I had not really role played before. I played one-offs, but I'd never been immersed in a campaign. And I didn't have the same expectations as everybody else because I didn't grow up with D&D as my first introduction to role-playing, and I didn't have the expectation that wizards are inherently weaker than fighters and they progress at these different levels and all of this stuff that people took for granted as being fundamental to role-playing. I didn't learn those. I didn't have to unlearn them with Ars Magica. So we ended up with this system that is balanced on a meta level. And you have these wildly diverse talented and like amazingly powerful wizards and like just Joe Fighter dude and educated
Lowly
guys
grogs.
all in the middle
And the grogs are my
And-
favorite.
Rods, yes.
troop style play with the swapping out of who's going to run the story, the idea that you would have shared characters, so the grogs are all in a grog pool and we just randomly pick who's going to play who tonight. Having multiple characters at the same time, where I could be like, well, I'm not sending my crippled wizard out there into the woods, but my woodsman companion can go. I thought this was genius and the most fun I'd ever had, and shortly thereafter I was playing in 3 games a week. So,
We sometimes had 3 different games going on in the Lion Rampant house at the same time,
Yeah.
which was quite wild.
I think it's crazy that they didn't adopt all of this. Like, why doesn't everybody play like that? I thought that's how it was.
Well, and so Nicole, fill in for us as well. How did you get linked up with the Lion Rampant kids then? So you were in '89 or?
I was a senior in high school, and Mark approached some of my theater geek friends.
Is it Derek Greco?
Yes,
All right,
Derek
Derek,
Greco, Kurt Hartwig,
Yes,
and so we had a little group, and he brought the stuff to be play tested outside of the college group that already knew so much about the way it was being done. And then it was, well, can I play regularly because I'm having a great time? And then it was like, oh yeah, Nicole, we're all going to Gen Con. We need somebody to check the P.O. box. Do you mind being our P.O. box checker? That was my first job. And then the more helpful I got, the more jobs I was given.
It does sound like a
I was
temp
doing
job.
layout and yeah, it was.
So yeah, you bring us back though, rightly so, to Gen Con. So
Yes.
Gen Con is where you brought these whimsy cards.
Yes, we took my parents' van. We had a
Big
couple
old
breakdowns on the way. That was the beginning of the Wraith curse, but we will not talk about that. And we get to Gen Con, and we realize that none of us have a credit card, and if we don't sell enough whimsy cards, we will not return home, nor will we be able to play for the hotel room, which all of us are crammed into. So we had this mission to sell enough of these whimsy cards, which only cost $5 each. So that was the thing, okay? So we had to become salesmen, or else we would not eat, and we would not sleep, and we would not go home. So it became this amazing experience, our first Gen Con as a business, trying to sell these damn cards,
And the funny
which
thing
no one wanted.
And the funny thing at the time is actually the first print run of these things, we got the paper stock wrong. And so we had these
Flimsy
things,
whimsy.
flimsy whimsy. There were these things that just were like so flimsy you couldn't shuffle them. They were just like. And
This is lesson 1 from Mark. Always check the weight of paper. I've never forgotten this lesson.
so we had these, and so our sales pitch is people would come by and we'd say, excuse me, would you like a flimsy whimsy? They're flimsy. We're versions of our real whimsy cards. And it was like, why would you make flimsy? but we had these stacks of these things, and so we figured might as well like give them away. And so
There are flyers, our free flyers. Well, not so free, but there are flyers.
and my favorite moment of that con was at one point I was like, we were like molesting everybody that went by us because we were really trying to sell these things. And there was this bearded guy goes by and excuse me, like a flimsy version of our, regular whimsy. And he turns around and, what are whimsy cards? And so I tell him and stuff. And when I'm talking to him, and he seems really interested. And then he says, well, I'll buy one of these. And then he reaches over to get his
Personal
bag.
check.
And his badge flips over and I see it's Dave Arneson. And I'm just like, Mark. Jonathan.
Yeah, and we worship David Arneson.
Yeah.
So we're the Minnesota crowd.
Yeah.
So the Wisconsin crowd favored Gary, but we're the Minnesota crowd. So we favored Dave.
But it was just like that someone.
We were on Team Edward.
But for us, I remember we were like, oh my God, someone who actually knows something about games, likes our product, bought it, and it was just like, we were like. I was giddy, so it was like,
The big time next.
maybe we're onto
Yeah.
something here. Maybe, we have a chance here.
So my favorite story from around then is I believe this is the time. Steve remembers differently than me, but Jim Ward, who was the president of TSR and running Gen Con, comes up to us and
Next
was
year.
quite.
Next year.
Oh, that was the next year.
It was next
Yeah.
year once our
Okay, with
But
our
that's
Mod.
the one for Ars Magica.
Okay, and if you could tell the story how we wanted to even
Well,
know.
but let's flip back to these guys. So
Sure.
to Team White Wolf.
Well, yeah,
because
Team
now
White
these
Wolf.
are separate things still. There's
Well,
Team
talking
White Wolf and
talking
Team
about
White
parents' vans.
Wolf. Right, yes.
So there's a common thread here. Stuart had only turned 16 and could barely legally drive, and our parents were like, "Yeah, we lived in Georgia at the time. Yeah, you can drive 16 hours up to Milwaukee and go to the convention. I'm 15. He's 16.
It was different times.
Oh, yeah. All right. But then as the magazine progressed from, in better art, a little bit of color in the printing. I mean, we got to the point where we would go to the printer, get an issue of the magazine, drive 16 hours to Gen Con, getting high on the ink fumes in the van, and get to Gen Con, unload in the heat there, and then we'd be passing out free issues. It got to be our thing at every Gen Con. We'd give out a free issue of the magazine.
And the ad rates went up then.
And then the ad rates went up
That
for that issue. That's right. And so our very first time we actually had color printing was when Shadowrun released. And we had we'd gotten an early copy from Fast. They were a good advertiser. We probably wouldn't exist if it hadn't been for their advertising. And I wrote a review of Shadowrun with a little color spread of Shadowrun art in it. But that's how we started, was going through all that so that we'd see the big ticket lineups of people lined up to wait for their badges and stuff, and we'd be out there box after box of magazines handing them out.
Try a magazine.
It's a
At least
flimsy version of a
we
regular
only had to
magazine.
give away things at least. We didn't have to charge them $5.
And this is
so
when, of course,
had it
we
easy,
all
I
ran into
guess.
each other the first time and started meeting. So,
Right.
Yeah, so
we were the little tiny companies, surrounded by these giants. And so, of course, we hung out. We're around the same age, and we're like, hey.
So I have a funny story about the first time I met with the White Wolf guys. I had actually submitted an article to this little magazine. It was something I'd written on for D&D for some, I couldn't even tell you, it was some Asian sort of class. And I had sent it in and got this nice rejection letter from Stuart. And in my mind, I had pictured this like 54-year-old guy, editor of magazine and stuff like that. So we get to Gen Con in '88, I think it was, and Mark says, "Hey, White Wolf guys are over, there. You might want to go say hi." And so I'm like, all right, I'm going to go up and complain about them rejecting my thing. So I go, stomping across the thing, and I see the White Wolf booth, and I see these two young guys in there, and I figured, oh, must be the editor's sons, He's like, helping out, and so I'm like, okay, I'm going to go up, so I go up, and Stuart's, and he's really tall. I'm rather both tall, but and it's just like, hi, I'm looking for the editor, and and he goes, well, I'm the editor. And I'm like, and I'm just like. And then that's like, I half-heartedly kind of complained, and then we started talking the whole week and the whole convention. We started talking about, well, we could write some stuff for you for our SmoggyCon stuff, and so it kind of got to be this whole collaboration thing where we would write stuff for our SmogCon, and it would be kind of premiered there even before we put in like.
And our thinking was that if we wrote an article for them, it would be like an advertisement we didn't have to pay for. And their thinking was this is an article they wouldn't have to pay for.
It all worked out.
It all worked out.
But it meant that we started like talking to them a lot. I mean, we were on the phone and stuff like that, and seeing them at conventions.
Yeah.
We went down to Dragon Con, I remember, it was the second Dragon Con.
Yep.
And it was just, it started this
Yeah.
sort of,
So the next year we came with Ars Magica, and that was a big year because Ken Rolston wrote this incredible review in the Dragon, and
Yeah.
we're getting all this amazing stuff. And that's when my favorite story ever happens, when Jim Ward, we win the award.
yeah, so we won the RPGA award. RPGA did these Gamers' Choice Awards, and I had actually written a story about my Ars Magica character in Polyhedron magazine number 25. You can actually go still find that somewhere.
Was it Lupus Mortis?
Lupus Mortis, my fire wizard was kind of a curmudgeon, and anyway, so I wrote this whole article about it, and it ended up being like this huge success. I remember Gene Raby, who ran RPGA at the time, like called me on the phone and said, "You got to write more of this stuff. It was the most, we've had more mail and more people saying they love this than ever." Oh, great, and that's awesome, But little I know that because of that article, when they came time to vote for the Gamers' Choice Award, everybody voted for Ars Magica.
That's not why they voted. They voted because of the best game.
It was because of Lisa's character.
So we're at the booth setting up, and they had the breakfast, RPG breakfast on that Thursday morning. My friend Rich Ryberg, who was in my D&D game, comes running. He goes, "You won! You won!" He's running across the hallway. "Won what?" He's holding this trophy. "You won!" And it's like Gamer's Choice Award, best game of the year, and we're like, "Holy shit, we won!" And then all of a sudden, everybody in the mother started like the doors open up. People were coming to the booth and looking at our stuff,
book,
and distributors are coming up from like and saying, "Hi, we'd like to carry this game."
And this
stuff.
was pre-internet, so this is why they needed somebody to check the P.O. box for the mail.
Yeah.
Very important.
And so all of a
wise
sudden, like
decision.
people are talking about translations and stuff, and then all this is happening. We're all giddy and stuff, and then this happens.
Jim Ward, who we had written the letter to TSR about Ars Magica, he's the name in the letter, right? He walks up, and he'd been drinking a little bit, and he's with his very good buddy, who happens to also be from Northfield, and a very nice guy. I won't mention his name, because Jim Ward looks very bad in the story. But he was drinking, I think, quite heavily, with Gary up in the bar that overlooked the whole thing. And he goes, "You know what you are? You are not us. We are TSR, and we're a first world company. And we run this convention. We own this convention. And you see all these other people? They're second world companies. They're trying to be us, but they'll never be us. There'll be nothing. We just let them exist because it helps fill out the convention. And you're a third world company. And you'll always be a third world company. You'll never be anything but a third world company. So just get used to it."
But then he said, "If you ever become a second world company, we'll kill you."
If you do grow up in a second world company, we're going to chop your head off. And I was like, just a kid. I'm going,
And he's wearing a suit.
okay. Okay. Thank you, sir. Good advice.
I can remember picking the book up and just paging through it and just sniffing and almost like holding it at distance because he was just so disdained by it, And it's just kind of like put it back on the table, and that's when he does.
Yes. And this is when I learned a very important lesson. Arrogance will destroy your company faster than anything else. And to never, ever, ever be arrogant about your place in the world, because everything can change in a blink of an eye. And so it has happened. We've all seen this industry change in blinks of an eye. And so, you can never stay on top without constantly being afraid and hustling. And continue to do the things you did in the beginning. Make friends. Go out there, meet people, and constantly, change your product and try new things.
Yeah.
Well, that took a turn I wasn't expecting. That's a great story. So I guess somewhere there must be the meet cute that led to the strength in numbers, the unification, the joining of Lion Rampant and White Wolf. So
It's a long story.
Well, I'm sure that we have time to tell
So
the
we
story.
found the grate that let us get into the sewers.
Yes. Yes.
No, I mean, so it was. You have to understand a little bit, at least about Lion Rampant, and this kind of Lion Rampant drives this part of the story.
Yeah.
So it was started on Jonathan Tweet's grandma's inheritance.
And,
Wasn't it pretty much?
well, no, half of it was my money
Okay.
from the mental hospital. I
that's
worked
right.
nights.
Oh, that's
I
right, you worked on it.
You guys all went to school. I worked nights and went to school.
I totally forgot about that part.
Yeah, everyone does except me.
Anyways, it was kind of this. I mean, it was a real bare bones operation, and
Bare
I mean,
bones.
and a bit of a frat house. I mean, we all
like
lived
Nero.
in, everybody's living in House Rampant, and when the first Ars Magica came out, we took our first sale was to the local college bookstore. We took the money and bought a keg. It's just,
As you do.
I mean, there was parties all the time at that place. We were just, it was like a frat house in many ways. And
When Jonathan put his arm through the window, falling
Jonathan,
down the
put his
stairs.
arm through the window once. Yeah, that was. Anyway, so but we were serious about making games, but we weren't really great business people. We didn't have a lot of cash and stuff. We were kind of just barely making enough money to put the next product out there.
And
None of
Ars
us were
Magica wasn't popular enough to support a company.
and none of us are getting paid. We were all basically had other jobs. Or I was working in University of Minnesota, and I'd
Yeah.
get up at like 2 in the morning, and I'd drive up to work, and I'd spend a full day there and come home, and then work on Lion Rampant until like 11 o'clock at night, get 3 hours of sleep, and get doing the same thing the next day. I mean, it was just like, it was,
So
the
everyone
only
was
one
really
working.
grumpy and
So,
snappish.
so it's very glamorous to start your own role-playing game company. You should all do it.
So what happens though is this, all of a sudden this guy, after this guy shows up out of the blue, a guy named Dan Fox, and he shows up in Minnesota, pretty much at our door, and he's like, I want to invest in your company. I have this game I want to do, but I really love your stuff. And he
He had huge talk, but he's a tiny little man.
yeah, but at the time he had money. He took us out to dinner, and we never went out to dinner. We never had money for dinner and stuff. And
He bought us cocktails.
It took so little to impress us.
buddy, I remember
Pizza, free pizza.
He has $10,000 to put in.
Yeah.
I remember he bought a print run of something and stuff. Anyway,
Yeah.
he kind of convinced us he had enough money to fund this, and I don't remember how he did that, but he did, because he seemed like a big wheeling deal. Like he didn't care about money. It was so he obviously had so much, and so he convinces us to go down to move the company down to Georgia.
Sight unseen.
Sight, yeah. Like, he goes, we're gonna
We all
we're gonna
quit our paying jobs.
we all quit our paying jobs to move down to Georgia,
Like idiots.
and
That might be
it
the
turned
lesson
out
here.
fine.
It turned out fine, but if
that's
my
just part of
kids
the
said they're
story.
gonna do this, I'd be like, over my dead body.
Right? Never do this. Bad idea.
So we go down, and he's bought us a house. He bought us a house, okay?
It turns out he didn't buy it.
No,
But
it
he
just-
told us he bought it.
Get out of the You can't spoil the plot. He buys us this house. We move into this beautiful house in the suburbs, brand new house, and we start,
McMansion.
Yeah.
and we start, working on all these ideas for games. We have a new game we're working on. Inferno, and then plus we have the challenge card game. We did the just all kinds of Houses of Hermes. We did all these products coming out the door, and we never could afford to do all these things because we didn't have much money. But this guy was just writing checks left and right, and so we get all this stuff out the door. Sales are picking up at this point. We actually have pretty good distribution. A product would come out, we'd actually sell enough copies to recoup all the money in the first month. It was, we're starting to get to be a real company, and things are looking pretty good. We go to Gen Con, have a freaking amazing Gen Con. On the way to Gen Con, we actually start talking about a game that Mark had been reading, Interview with the Vampire and stuff, and he's like,
No, I hadn't read it.
you haven't read it yet?
No, I purposely didn't read it.
Well, we came up with the idea of this vampire game on the way to Gen Con and stuff, and so, and that should have its own story too in this thing, but it's kind of important because we come back home and there's an eviction notice, and we've been evicted out of our house, and it turns out this guy spent every penny. He had an inheritance, and he'd spent every last
His
penny.
wife
Yeah,
That's
his
right.
wife has-
Wife's-
wife had an inheritance.
That's right. He
Which
spent-
I still feel guilty about. But anyway. Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, we're here, evicted. All these bills are coming due, and we thought he'd be paying for these print runs, and it was grim. And I remember Mark saying, "That's it, we're done. We're moving back to Minnesota." Because it was like pretty grim. It looked
It was like
I don't know how we're
I
gonna do
quit
this.
my good paying job in Northfield, moved on 30 days notice, got there, got a bunch of stuff ready. Now we're going to be homeless. And,
Yeah.
and I've
And
got
so
to, like,
it was looking really, really grim.
that's how I got my
And-
job at Winn-Dixie.
One thing you'll know about me, if you've ever listened to my whole career, is that I'm kind of stubborn, don't like to give up on things. And so I came up with a crazy, crazy plan. And it was, and so I wrote this whole plan up, and I have it somewhere in my collection. And someday I'll have to publish this thing, because it's pretty insane. But I was like, look, and so my plan hinged on Stuart Weick and convincing Stuart. So Stuart is a meticulous businessman. He never, he knew every penny and where it went. He never overspent. He had great credit rating. He paid his bills on time, and we were a little bit more.
So let's. so the plan is, let's steal Stuart Wick's credit rating. That's the plan.
I would put it differently. I was like,
And you did put it differently.
we will leverage.
Leverage.
No, and so the idea that I presented was, look, well, Lion Rampant becomes kind of a ghost company. We move all the assets over to to a new company. We call it White Wolf because it was White Wolf magazine at the time. But I figured the printer wouldn't know the difference between White Wolf and White Wolf magazine. And so we'll start a company called White Wolf. And then all the new products that come out will come out under the White Wolf name. Use Stewart's credit rating. They're selling enough now where they make their money back right away. And then any extra money we made on sales of old Ars Magica products would go towards paying the old print bills that we still had from Lion Rampant. And once those were paid off, we'd close that company down and just be White Wolf. And it was like, and so I remember we went up to the top of Stone Mountain. We
Like you
hiked
do.
up to the top of Stone Mountain overlooking Atlanta. And I had to convince Mark, because Mark still wanted to go back to Minnesota. So I was like, I had to convince Mark that he wanted to stay and do this crazy plan. And then I had to convince Stuart that he wanted to get in with a bunch of these yahoos who had just spent way too much money or were evicted out of their house and somehow had to convince him to put all his credit and all his meticulous business skills and stuff at risk, merging in with us. And then the linchpin was this vampire game we had just come up with. And this whole thing was like, I laid it out and then I stood back and was like, is it going to happen? And
So I get this phone call from Stu, and we've been, the magazine kept growing in circulation.
Yep.
We were putting out a couple little things. They didn't sell awesome, but they were.
No,
they were footholds.
to be clear, Stuart finished university, then moved back in with mom and dad, got a subsistence level, if best, living, doing the magazine. At that point, he had taken it over completely. We went to different universities, and he took it over. And, occasionally borrowed scholarship money I had to pay for the next print run, and then paid me back. That was a thing. But yeah, he had.
So one of the things that happened during that time period was we were trying to do the first color cover issue. There was 8.
8, yeah.
Yeah. And this just gives you a little idea of what Stu was like. To try to, at the same time that we're trying to build up to this much more high quality, full color, Stu had started to talk to and work with this guy.
Mark Bond.
I never liked him. Who wanted huge marketing ideas and go to contests at Gen Con and all this sort of stuff. And Mark wound up walking away with the money to make the next issue. And Stu called the advertisers and asked them to recontribute all of the money to print that again. And I know there were probably a few who didn't do it, but the vast majority of them were convinced because they knew Stu was this incredibly decent fellow who just got a bad situation, and they wanted to see the magazine succeed. They wanted to see Stu succeed, and they
how
knew
audacious,
he
right?
would pay them
Just
back. They absolutely never doubted he would pay them back. So that I always like to tell that story because I was just so impressed because I thought we were dead in the water at that point.
Yeah.
Never going to do another issue of this magazine. Better get another freelance client, and then boom, he's like, no, we're doing it, Rich, and it's going to be color. Oh yeah. But so to get back to this story, we're working together. We've got Ken Cliff doing stuff, and Steve's in college, but still keeping in connection.
You were coming over on
Yeah.
weekends and stuff.
Yeah.
And I know he talked to you about this too, but I get this phone call and he said, Rich, you're talking to the Lion Rampant people. Okay, well, what's going on? They want me to be the CEO. I was like, of Lion Rampant. Why do they want that? Well, they say they can't handle the money and I can handle the money, and we know that. And I was like, well, yeah, you can absolutely do that. He's like, but I don't know. I mean, this is a really huge decision. And I said, well, if you do this and you do what you do so well, and the company grows and succeeds, you're a hero. And if the company fails, everyone will just go, well, nobody could have saved it. You're in a win-win scenario, say yes.
And then he said yes.
And now I never actually knew what happened because the next phone call I got, it was a partnership, right?
Yeah, it's a partnership between Mark.
So somewhere the conversation turned to that, and I said, well, I guess that's better then.
That was the key because we needed to get that White Wolf name, and we needed to protect the assets, and so we did this. But the merger was contingent on at some point on selling off, on paying down the debt on
Right.
Lion Rampant and stuff, but we had this whole plan, and it worked out actually, and then we.
But to be clear, it was by no means a one-sided thing at all, because you guys at the time were bringing in Lion Rampant was bringing in Ars Magica, which was this award-winning game, which had
It was
come out with
making a fair bit of
many,
money.
Yeah.
and it was, you know, it was.
Well, and then people like me were around to do things like layout. I
Exactly.
started laying out the
That's
magazine
right, you started
for a
getting
while.
Exactly.
and-
Yes.
We had bodies.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we did.
And
Brand.
it's sort of by combining, you reached a certain critical mass, some sort
Yeah.
of minimum critical mass to be able to do more audacious things.
But we knew we needed a hit, right? We knew we had to come up with something that would be a hit. And so basically Stuart and I made a deal that he would sort of take over the running of the company. I would do my time in the warehouse each day. But otherwise, I would just sit there trying to come up with an idea. And as many of you must know, since we're all role players, you know, just sitting in a room trying to come up with a great idea is actually quite difficult. So the first idea that came to mind was Inferno, which is the famous Wraith Curse game. And the idea was you play a famous person in hell. And one day we were playtesting it, and we're back in that house, that McMansion, and I'd close all the curtains and had the gas fire on. I go, "Welcome to hell!" And suddenly we hear a crash, and all the lights go out. And we all run outside.
And we're freaking out because we think he's set this thing up, right? He's building. Mark's a great GM, and he's setting the tension level up, and he's describing. We're going through the mist, and we know we're going to see the Grim Reaper, and he's going to be this major character in this thing, and we're going through, and he has this whole big, and he's raising up the tension, and just as he hits this crescendo. And everything was dark.
That was the most perfect timing.
But tell them why. Tell them why. Tell them
This
why.
Domino's pizza truck he pulled up next door up the hill, didn't put his brakes on as he was delivering the pizza. It slowly rolled down the hill into the electric transformer for the whole neighborhood. And as he gets outside, he's in there trying to start the car. And I'm looking at the gas tank and watching things dripping down. And we're yelling, "There's gas! There's gas dripping! There's gas dripping!"
And there's kids on bikes that are riding up
get
too.
back! Everyone get back! And we're like, it's this incredible panic. And get out of the car! He won't get out of the car. Get out of the car! And now I usually tell the story that I grabbed him and pulled him out of the car. It's not quite true.
He wasn't going down there, trust me.
I wasn't getting it very close. That finally gets out of the car, and then it does explode. And at that point, every single computer, fax machine, and electronic device in the entire house is kaput, and we're out of business. Completely out of business. Again, we have everything is dead in the house. Dead. So we're like going, oh.
They didn't sell surge protectors back in those days.
No.
And it wouldn't have helped. I mean, the entire town was blown up. All the electricity in the entire town was gone.
Actually, my computer survived. I still have it.
Oh, it wasn't plugged in.
I'm sure it was plugged in.
So we managed to call up Domino's. And I remember these panic days talking to them. I told them we cut a deal where in exchange for us to sign a waiver, they would pay us immediately. And that's sort of what kept us through that little bridge. But anyway, then I decided we're not doing Inferno.
No, actually, hang on. There's another part to that story that's really. This is because remember. So we go to Gen Con. We come back. We have the eviction notice. But while we were at Gen Con, so Mark had one printed copy of the rules for Inferno, and he was sitting on the downstairs table. And while we're at Gen Con, a pipe burst right above it, and the water poured right on top of that manuscript, destroying it. And then there was like. We're not doing Inferno. Because if we keep going at this, who knows?
We
A plane will
came
hit
back
our
to a
house,
flooded
something will
house and
happen.
an
Somebody
eviction
does not want you to do that.
That was just like, all right. So this vampire idea.
Yeah, so there was another idea. that
This
you had
vampire idea we had
way
at the
back.
Gen Con. It sounds pretty good.
So we're on the way to Gen Con, I remember years before I think I was telling Rich was in the car and Stuart was in the car, and we had a couple of different cars going up. And I remember telling a story about how Jonathan Tweet, from D&D 3rd edition, had watched Lost Boys, which is, by the way, 30th year anniversary this year. And he and my sister and I were walking to the theater, and Jonathan said, I wish you could do a role-playing game about vampires, but it would get so boring killing them all the time. And I said to him, and my sister can confirm this, we can call her right now. And I said, I know there's a way we could do it, I just don't know right now. And then I was remembering that story or telling the story, and then something hit me, oh, fuck, you're the vampire. You're the vampire. And it became one of the most singular moments of my life, because that Gen Con, I was the party boy back then.
Yeah.
I would go to every party. I was up until dawn. I would work in the booth because you're young and you could do anything. And that Gen Con, I was just filling out notebook after notebook. I'd send people like, get me another notebook, quick. And I was at the booth writing notes. It was just like it all came out in this sort of flood. It was like it was, it was almost like the autonomous writing, when you're writing from the spirits. It sort of felt like it all just sort of came out. And that was an amazing moment, and it was just pretty clear from that point on. That's what we were doing. It was immediately clear. That's the game. Everyone agreed. That's the
So
game.
I was one of the only other people who had a car, so I was never in your car
Yeah, I
for
was in
all
your
of
car
this
when that
fun
happened,
stuff.
so-
I was driving. I had the station wagon or whatever, and I was driving
yes.
behind. I missed a lot of the.
think it was my car.
we leave and we go to Gen Con. We come home from Gen Con. Plans completely changed. When did that happen? Well, we were driving. And
Yeah.
Trust me.
Trust
Trust
me. It's all new.
So how much in that initial moment of the world of darkness did you see? Just beyond, did you just get the vampire part then, or how much?
No,
did you
very
see?
quickly the
Where did you go from
idea of werewolves being their enemies, that came up fairly quickly. And so I knew then the next game, of course, would be werewolves. And then the whole idea was, there was a very famous earlier game many years before called Monsters.
Can't
we're-
say Andre, yeah.
Yes, which I'd never played, but I'd heard about. And I've been looking for the copy everywhere. But I'd always heard the legend of it. And so I was like, you know what, we'll just do a whole series. And so the whole marketing scheme quickly came into being. We're all talking about it. And we got this whole idea that this is how we monetize it the best. Is that you do a whole series of these games, one a year, which is insane, but we're going to do it anyway. And they'll each be their own lines, they'll all tie together so you can interplay with it between them. And it became this whole sort of plan. It was from very early on. From very early on, it was very clear that it would be these 5 games,
Well, and so Vampire, one of the things was so remarkable about it when it came out was the gothic look of it, the gothic horrors. There had been horror games. Call of Cthulhu had been out since, right? It's 1981, right? But there was something different about the aesthetic and especially how it looked. So, Richard, I mean, how do you think the look of Vampire really evolved?
Well, at what point was Jiggity Josh come on board?
After the first edition, I think, right?
Well, no, he was hanging around. Josh was hanging
Josh
around
was-
early on.
Yeah.
By the way, Josh and
Josh
Les,
was like
we
16.
met them at the comic book store.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kids hanging out. And I remember calling in, hey, there's this kid at the comic book store who's a good artist. Do you want to meet him?
It was seriously
And I'm
like
like,
16
yeah,
or 17.
when does he come in? Oh, we'll call him right now.
Do you
Okay.
remember having
His
to
mom
talk to
drove
me
him over.
about the borders?
This is Josh
of the first
Timber.
edition of
But,
Vampire?
but we were, originally we were gonna, there was an actual original painted cover by Dan Frazier.
There's a bunch of
Let's
different
have one
covers.
conversation here. We're getting so Nicole and yes.
Oh, talking about the look.
Yes.
I was, because I kept getting handed jobs just because I was a warm body, I got to do a lot of things. And at that point, I think I was art directing or something. And Mark comes to me and he says, all right, we got to get Rich to do some borders, like the ones he puts in White Wolf magazine. I want this to be really this gothic border with
modern.
gothic stuff.
Yeah.
But mine.
And so I'm like, all right, gothic stuff. So I passed this on to Rich, and I think we're on the telephone too,
Yes, we
you
were.
know. And I'm like, Rich, so I talked to Mark, he wants you to do the thing, it'll be for the whole book, and it'll be on every page, and he really wants to hit that gothic look, and that's what I have to tell you. So you were like, great, fine. You did a little sketch. It was like one of those wrought iron gates and vines and thorns and skulls.
I think there was a skull of wrought iron.
Yeah,
that's right.
and I remember bringing it to Mark and of course we weren't. There was no scanning. There were no files. Like you drew it and you mailed it to us, and we opened
Or
it
fax.
up. And then Mark was like, no, that's not what I'm looking for at all. I said Gothic. And I was like, so I called you back, and I was like, well, Mark wants it to be more Gothic. And I remember your response.
More cowbells.
It was just like, I'm gonna need more to go on than Gothic. That's about as Gothic as it gets. And I think we ended up using that one that you
For
did.
part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it was for the one section, right?
But so the
least
evolving
modern
look.
section.
Yeah.
But actually, I don't remember who was actually talking to the artists, because there were 3 artists plus Chris plus Tim.
Yeah.
Right?
I might have been. I was doing
I
a lot of
think
art
it was
direction
you.
back then.
Tim was the key find, obviously.
yeah.
You know, and that was sort of, you know, as soon as we remember, I forgot who found him
I
at
talked to him
Gen
at
Con,
Gen
but
Con.
I remember seeing it instantly, knowing, yeah, we gotta get this guy. I don't care what it
He's
costs.
done the
Yeah, you're the one that
This is
negotiated.
the guy.
with
This-
him.
yeah,
for the
yeah.
benefit
I remember
of
I
the
found him
audience,
and
when we say
introduced you.
Tim, we
Tim
of course
Bradstreet.
mean-
And I
Bradstreet,
told
he had been
Tim,
working for Fossil.
listen, we can't pay you with money, but someday we'll make you famous.
Yeah. And he went
I
so
believe I did do a sound like
I believe
I'm
you
gonna
did.
say
You did. It was.
It's like,
Pretty
you
like
know,
that.
what you will get from us is
live
not
for 5
filthy
years,
lucre. It's much greater than that. What you will get from us is immortality.
So what was your plan to get Vampire in front of the people?
Well, actually, there's
Okay,
one,
one
I
more.
want to say that so everybody knows the classic cover, right? But that wasn't how we originally planned it. We actually commissioned a regular old painted cover, like we do
Several.
with every.
We went through several covers, and every one I was like, no, it can't be that. No.
I don't know what
No,
I want,
no,
but
no.
it's not this.
And
Right,
then,
it's
and
too
then,
typical.
This can be a supplement. Next,
and then finally, Mark gets the idea of like
green marble.
the green marble and a rose, and so he goes down to like the local grocery store, buys a rose, and then we went to some.
No, we went to an actual yard that
Yard,
sold
yeah.
marble, and
Piece of
we
marble
went
like
through
this
thousands
and
of
like
marble
this thick.
pieces, picking out each one to say that which is this, and finally we found the perfect one.
Went to some
We
photo
put it in the
studio,
back of his car, and we hauled it to the photo studio.
Mark Pace.
And then put the
Yeah.
ankh. So I don't know,
Mark
it was your-
Pace in the photograph.
But he's the photographer.
Yeah, yeah.
and then you had the ankh. It was your ankh, I'm pretty sure. And
Yeah, and it was actually the rose that he gave his wife on their wedding day. It was the dead rose in
Oh,
the back.
that's right.
Yeah, left over from their wedding. Yeah, and it worked. Obviously, that without that cover, Vampire would not have been successful. There's no way. If it had any of those earlier covers,
There was also betting the company on the promo run,
the
though.
promo
yeah.
was key. Because before that, Shadowrun had done
Yep.
a
That was my idea.
16-page promo,
Yep.
which basically we all thought was fantastic. Because we were all so excited about Shadowrun because there's this amazing pamphlet that wasn't just one sheet of paper.
Yep.
It was 16 pages of detail about this game. And we're like, okay, we're doing that. But to do that, we had to borrow money.
We did the
Which
exact-
meant Stuart went to his parents and I went to my grandparents in extreme trepidation and extreme panic and said, I promise you, if I cannot pay this back in a year, I will quit the company and I will just get a normal job and I'll pay you back. And they go, will you get a job near us? I go, okay. So they wanted me to live with them, of course, you know. And I'm very happy to say that we paid them back in 6 months, both Stuart Parent and that was the greatest day of my life. Like we were able to pay it back in half the time. Hoorah!
So there's actually another funny story about paying back, and that is that right before Vampire came out the door, we got notices from the phone company and electric company they were going to shut us down,
Yep.
because we ran out of money. And so we do what every company would do. And you go, you hear about starving artists. We went to our artist, and we said, "Hey, Rich, could you float us a loan?"
Yeah,
Did
because
we really
he
do
was
that?
the grown
I
up.
forget that. Really?
Rich
Oh,
gave
no,
us
I
a
do remember
loan
that now.
to pay
Yeah,
those bills,
yeah.
so because we knew
Because we were
Vampire
all
was going to be successful.
22 and you were,
Like 87.
respectable. Probably 30 or
And by the way,
something.
day to day, we were all of us, Stuart, everyone, we're all living on ramen noodles and donuts.
And popcorn.
Of course, Stuart got to go home, which was
That's
nearby,
right,
eat
that's
ramen's food.
The weekend
But-
home cooked
but-
meal helped sustain the
yeah.
calories through the week.
But that's the Christmas that everyone else went home that Christmas.
Oh, that's
And
right.
I was all alone in the house. So basically, I ran out of money. And so I finally decided to go to the change box from Gen Con, which is full of rolls of pennies. And so I went to Waffle House with exactly like $3.20. Carefully did it out, and the woman's just looking at me going, "Oh my God, you poor thing,
so hungry.
you poor thing." But just want to have some hash browns for Christmas. Hash browns for Christmas.
So again, starting your own role-playing company, very glamorous.
Yes. And we can see where the Gothic horror came from. So, but clarify this for me, because I mean, I remember the vampire insert in White Wolf magazine. So you had to pay yourself to put that in, or was this a separate insert? you're
White
talking
Wolf
about?
Magazine kept charging us, man.
Yeah, we're
Well,
bastards.
We're one company. We're one company.
Yeah, we were only company.
Was that inserted in Dragon?
It was. No, not Dragon.
No, that
We
was
couldn't,
White Wolf.
we couldn't afford Dragon.
No.
But we,
Shadowrun
but,
was.
but we passed them on to every game store.
Yes.
So by then we had a
Yeah.
pretty good distribution network. We
Yeah, it was
built
good
up
sales.
laboriously, and we basically every distributor got boxes and boxes of these that we shipped to them for free, and then they for free passed them out all the stores. So every store in America, you got these stack of promos, and people went nuts. So even before the game came out, we're already getting letters. You know, the nascent internet was a buzz with everyone talking about what was going on, and we knew even before the game came out that something was going on.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, you
And-
could tell.
But since we're all at Gen Con, and it's
Yes.
Gen Con 50,
Yes.
I think it's important to maybe say just how important Gen Con was at that time, especially to the whole distribution of games, to the way games were sold, I mean, now you'll go and, okay, Starfinder's debuting, okay.
And it sold out on the first day. Yes.
So we still, to this day, have a great tradition at Gen Con of having some awesome games release here. But the distribution system at the time was very mom and pop still. And if you wanted your game to really hit among the gaming crowd, and you wanted to make ends meet as a game publisher, you came to Gen Con and released it.
Gen Con was our
So when I was
before
doing,
internet. Gen Con was how we all communicated and figured out stuff. It was the center of gaming. It still is, but back then, because there was no internet, it was everything.
when I was
everything.
doing the layout for first edition Vampire, it was I told this already at the old
tell the
ladies
story 'cause it's really good.
of gaming, but Mark, you are a very creative man, but you are also perhaps a little dyslexic.
How dare you?
How dare.
So we're in the layout stage. I'm working on old PageMaker. PageMaker at this point doesn't have a spell check, and we are down to the wire. And we start noticing that there's this sections that don't make any sense, and I know Stuart edited better than this, and we find out that Mark had some really good creative ideas that he wanted to add at the last minute.
That's a damnable lie.
So the situation was, it has to be out for Gen Con. The entire company and all of our livelihoods.
Is a. I must have heard that a million times.
From me, probably.
This has to be out by Gen
Frickin'
Con.
A.
So it
Can't
is.
miss Gen Con.
It is
Nothing
down
changed
to the
every year
last
after that.
day, and they've split the manuscript, printed out the manuscript, and split it into teams. And everybody's gone into their own room and is looking page by page to see if there are typos or something that needs editing. And then they're bringing me the individual pages, and I'm inputting very carefully all the editorial changes and watching the text flow get all screwed up and relaying out the book as I go. And we were all freaked out. We were all like stressed and giddy, and people hadn't been sleeping.
You
And,
may have
and
even argued a bit.
Possibly.
And Stuart was the calming influence who, even though he was standing over my shoulder occasionally tapping his watch, he literally was like he had a laser focus on getting this thing out. And it was like 4:45, and we've got the guy coming to pick the envelope up, and we've got to have it done. And it was like literally the running of the envelope to the door so it could get to the printer at the very last moment, so that it could make Gen Con, so that we wouldn't all starve and die. And it
I get
worked.
glamorous.
We had that happen with every single core World of
It-
Darkness book all the
Thereafter.
way for the next
It
4
became
years.
tradition. You don't want
Yeah,
to,
say
shirk
that.
Remember, all the
tradition.
core books were released for Gen Con, of
Yeah.
course. I mean, that.
So Yeah.
Goes without saying.
I mean, you go to any company, they'll tell you about Death March to Gen Con. And it's usually that push to that date that you know you got to get it to the printer. And then and almost every company goes through this. So they do this Death March where, you're literally working every day, 12, 14, 20 hours, whatever, getting sleep on the floor and then getting up and doing it again. I mean,
Building yourself a
trust me,
12-pack of Diet Coke habit a day.
you don't have to be a small company to have this happen. Big companies do this too.
Yes.
But the key year for me is not the year that Vampire came out. It's the year afterwards when Gen Con changed from an all-boy club, 99% boy,
Oh, yeah.
1% chainmail bikini. And suddenly, there were women everywhere. And I'll never forget company for company coming to our booth because we were already, by the second year, we were a pretty big booth, a very major presence. And they're coming up to us and going, "You brought the girls to gaming." And I was like, "Yes."
I think you were more like, yeah.
So, but the first year you came with Vampire, what was the reception like? So you said the second year everything was real big. First year, did you sell out? Did you?
Oh yeah. We sold out. There was a frenzy around the booth. There was lines. It was just like, you know what it is that for years and years we've gone to Gen Con and we're the little people. We're the third world company, right? And then suddenly we have success, and it was just amazing. It was this incredible thing. We were smiling. All of us are beaming. We had this. We were successful. We had money. We had our first White Wolf dinner on Sunday because we had money to pay for it. We had money. I mean, it was incredible. We went to the German place.
Maters. We joked that we ate the fax machine. Right, we spent as much on the dinner as we would have on a new fax machine.
Yeah. Back then a fax machine actually was expensive.
It was, yeah.
Also, a fax, if you don't know what that is. Put a piece of paper in here, and it sends it over to another fax machine. It was
Through
amazing.
like ether.
You
All
see
right,
the
so-
piece of paper go to.
Well, I want to flip a little bit to where the success of Vampire took White Wolf, and I guess in particular a big component of that has to be once the collectible card game market started. Vampire made the jump, it would seem, to a card game.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
That's a pretty big jump.
Well, I mean, one of the things that was pretty amazing is that around this time Lisa left to go to Seattle, but we were friends with Peter, and Peter wrote to me, and Lisa wrote to me about this game, and I immediately was like, "Whoa, wait a minute, what is this?" And they wouldn't tell me too much. They're very cagey, but I flew out to Seattle, and I played it with the creator. What's his name again?
Richard Garfield.
Richard Garfield. I don't know if you've heard this name before, but I played with him, and I'm personally immediately like, "Oh my fucking god, this is incredible! This is going to blow everything up." And I say, "Why don't we sell you 5 years of advertising in White Wolf magazine for some shares?" And they went, "Okay." And so I was like, called Stuart. I go, and he's like, "You sure? 5 years?" I go, "Trust me, trust me. We're gonna do anything we can to get shares of this company." So we knew it was coming, and so we basically wanted to be. So I also negotiated that if this game was successful, the next game would be a vampire themed game. So I had my lunch pail ready to go, and like we're next.
So I'm looking at this from a slightly different point of view. I had left White Wolf. We had gone up to Wizards of the Coast, and Magic came very early. Like right as I was moving up there, we got introduced to Richard, and he came up with the idea. Within like a month, we had hand collated cards. We were playing like handmade cards he had made and cut out with scissors, and we were playing this game and just freaked out by it actually. And but it was so big we didn't know how to make it and stuff, and so that was part of our problem. We didn't have enough money to even contemplate making this game, so we made a bunch of role-playing products, but we were working on how do we get this thing done. And actually White Wolf ended up helping us in another way because they introduced us to a guy named Luke Mertens.
That was me.
And that was-
Peter came up to me in Jenkins and said, "I need a printer." I go, "Oh, I know a guy. Here, Come
And
with me.
Yeah, and so they introduced us the Cardamundi, which was the key piece.
And
that
Luke
helped
just
us make
retired
it.
last year.
Oh, did he?
Yep, I had dinner with him tonight.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Say hi, please.
And but it was I had our biggest fear with Magic was that other people were going to take their brands, their famous brands, and leverage them in this space and come say, oh, trading card games, this is cool. And before we could really get Magic out there, there'd be another game coming out, and they would have bigger penetration. They'd take the market from us. So my cunning plan was to use all my friends I knew and tie up all their intellectual properties with contracts so that no one else could make a game. And so, yeah, Mark, sell me on this. We'll totally do this game. I mean, I wanted to do it too because I love Vampire, but
They took their time.
But we also did Vampire. We did BattleTech. I had the Middle Earth license. I tried to get Star Trek, Star Wars, D&D. I mean, I tried to get everything, right? And we got Cyberpunk. I mean, I basically made a list of here's all the things that could possibly hurt us.
And I guess you did use that Cyberpunk one.
We did do, yeah, we did
Yeah.
a Cyberpunk one, yeah,
Okay.
too, with
Netrunner, yeah.
yeah, Netrunner. I mean, we didn't do the Middle Earth one. We actually gave them back the rights at one point because our design people said they couldn't do justice to the brand or something. We did not do Rage. So we do Vampire, but we didn't lock up Werewolf and the other stuff, and so that.
So do you think, looking back on that, because you put a lot of effort into this defensive maneuvering that you were doing, do you
We
think
probably
it actually
didn't. We
needed
probably
to do
didn't
that?
need it.
Yeah.
Well, but we didn't know at the time, right?
Oh,
that we would
absolutely.
just blow up like it did, right?
Yeah, it
And
was
we
ins-
thought
it
we
was
thought,
insane.
and I mean, we were a little company in the basement of Peter's house, and we had, probably $2,000 to spend on marketing, and it's back to the basement for me. It's back to
Yep.
being the scrappy little company and so we were afraid of these big companies and being able to take this idea, and that's why we were so.
Those first world
That's why
companies.
we're so cagey. Yeah, those first world companies, we were cagey about it.
cut your head off.
We were like a fifth world company back then. I mean, we were like so down the pipe, and so there was a little fear. There was a lot of fear about that.
When did you take over the business side,
Yeah.
Steve?
So good question. I came back in 1993 because Vampire came out in '91.
Yeah.
And then Werewolf came in '92, and the company was growing rapidly. And Mark was dedicated to creative efforts, which pulled Stuart into managing the company. Even though his preference also would be to be an artist first and a businessman second. And so they said, "Hey, Steve, why don't you come back, join the company?" And of course, I was gung ho to do that.
You'd
to
also
come back
go
to it.
through. You'd go through.
Yeah, I'd gone out. I'd finished
Camp.
university. I'd worked for General Electric. I'd done actual business stuff in the business world. It was alien. And
That was how we
yeah,
Gen Con.
yeah, exactly.
We need a suit, guys.
A suit. So I came back to the company and took over as president, and it was an interesting time. There was a lot of chaos in the company. There was, but also just a lot of energy and a lot of fun.
We're wildly growing, and so any growing company is going to be difficult to run correctly. And,
Yeah.
and back then there wasn't really this ethos you have today of a startup and how to do it.
No.
We were just sort of making it up as we went along.
Yeah.
And we had no idea.
Yeah. And even as a rapidly growing publishing company, you're investing a lot in inventory. You're printing the next book. Your warehouse is filling up with books. And it looks like maybe we should be making money, but if we're making money, it's all in these books that keep piling up in the
Inventory.
warehouse and the inventory
Bane
and
of a
things.
company.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it was a wonderful time. And then as Magic came out, and we were able to work with Lisa again on VTS. Right? And,
Well, it was Jihad first, then we
Jihad,
changed
then-
it.
yes.
Vampire.
Oh, yeah.
Whoa, whoa,
I
whoa,
shouldn't
whoa,
jump
whoa. No, I
ahead.
know nothing about this. Don't even say that word.
That was delightful. But all through that period, we had just fantastic experiences with Gen Con, with being a young, growing company.
Yeah, fantastic.
Fantastic. Just fantastic.
Drunken and insane.
Yes.
When
Yeah,
did,
The White Wolf parties
the
were
White Wolf
legendary.
parties at
Yeah.
They were
Gen Con,
legendary.
They were.
they were,
So I have one more question though,
Yeah.
because we're going to take some questions from the audience here in a minute. But one thing we associate vampire with, animically looking back at it in historical retrospective, is LARPing. So what was the intersection of how did you get?
Well,
into LARPing
I actually, this is one of my favorite stories. When I was an exchange student in Australia when I was 17, after 3 days in Australia, my host brother said, we're going to Canberra for the game convention. And I was like, yay, I'm going to go. Great. And so we get there, and I'm wandering around separate from them, and I notice these people arguing in the hallway about air tickets and how much air they had left. And they're running around, and I started watching. I couldn't figure out what was going on, and then I slowly realized over like an hour just watching them that they were playing Star Trek, and that these hundreds of people were all on a ship, and that this is the bridge, and these are Marines. And so I quickly found someone. I said, I want to play. And so I've become a Marine, and I'm playing what ended up being, I found out later, the very first LARP ever run at a convention in the history of gaming. I happened to be there. And I was obsessed. And my host brothers kept saying, our mother called, you're supposed to go with us to see the museum. No, I'm not going. Which ruined my relationship with the family for the year. I knew it was going to do that, and I did not care because I was playing the greatest thing in my life. And at one point, I actually ended up saving the captain by strapping a nuclear bomb on my back and beaming down to the planet where he was being held hostage and saying, I'm a fucking Marine, I'll blow everyone up, let him go. And then when we got back to the thing, the captain had me arrested and thrown in the brig.
There you go. That's what you did, sir.
consequences.
Yeah.
Consequences.
So you brought that
I
back.
saved your ass. Anyway,
You brought that back, and we did some of those Wizards Tribunals.
Yes,
Yes,
Yeah,
and,
so that was really
every game we did, I wanted to do LARP. And I had this feeling that for Vampire, that LARP wouldn't make us any money, but that it would take the IP and spread it everywhere. I just knew that LARP is one of those things that's infectious, and also I was going to these conventions like in Brazil, and I would run a demo with 5 people. I can't convert an entire country to Vampire with 5 people. So what I ended up doing is I said, okay, everyone at this table, find 20 people that are going to be in your clan. Go. And they'd run to the convention. Each of them would come back with 20 people. Okay, your clan Ventru. And I would run what ended up being a 5,000 person LARP by myself in Brazil. And that LARP happened to be televised on the Brazilian equivalent of 60 Minutes. Only their Andy Rooney wasn't an old guy. She was a young, vivacious woman who made fun of me viciously in Portuguese and all of us geeks, right? But that happened to get Vampire on the attention of every gamer in the entire country. And to this day, Vampire is still the #1
Really
game
strong.
because of her. And she actually felt so sorry for me. She took me to all these very glamorous parties. So,
Do you remember when we got the videotape from the mall in Florida?
no.
There's a LARP convention. They I don't know how they did this, but they took over for a weekend a mall in Florida,
Wow.
and they videotaped it. They sent it to Mark to show him what this amazing thing. He pops it in there, and we're watching. And I don't know, it was 400 something people, and the biggest we did with the tribunals was like what 30, 50
Yeah.
people, Dragon Con or something. And we're watching all these things, and I'm like, look what you did. Look at that! All those people running around pretending to be vampires, but.
I mean, but when we were playtesting Vampire, I mean, for the first playtest, Mark set it up in the house, and we.
It was LARP.
It was a LARP, and we literally played our characters and went around the house and
I locked them in my room as I was the servant of the great vampire. Master says you must go in here. You must not leave. And so I had a tiny little window in my bathroom. And they all climbed out of it. And I finally realized they were gone. And they were running down the street, and I was going, come back! Come back!
we go out in the neighborhood. And,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's how we play tested the Vampire.
Yes,
game,
yes.
And then from the very beginning, it was literally LARP from the
It
beginning.
was LARP from the get-go.
Fantastic. Okay, so we will take some questions from the audience. Yes.
I noticed that like Tremere is in the Vampire game also a clan in Ars Magica.
Yeah. That's where the house
How did
is.
that come about? Were you like,
It was a pure marketing thing. Basically, the idea was if we mention, well, also it was just partly laziness. If we mention Ars Magica and Vampire's popular, people will go, oh, it's also in here. I can learn more about my favorite clan, and they'll buy Ars Magica. But also, it's just like I like worlds that are huge, and everything interconnects. And so I thought, let's interconnect Ars Magica and Vampire, make them part of the same setting and universe, and it was just fun.
Yeah, and then of course it resurfaced as a thing in Mage
Yep.
Oh,
when
yeah.
we were designing and writing that
Yep.
because okay, well, do we even down to the magic system, like how much of the Ars Magica magic system
Yep.
is modeled, does Mage model after, and now you've got Tremere there, but what about those, and do we carry it forward? And there's the Order of Hermes,
Yep.
and yeah.
So actually, one interesting thing I remember about making Vampire is that, and this kind of ties into your question, is that when we first did it, we didn't have the clans. It was like a traditional game. You just made up a vampire and you came up with your backstory, and we were bringing in people that really didn't role play because a lot of women and stuff in the area wanted to play, but they didn't have any history in playing D&D like we did or other games, and so they had a hard time with character concepts and coming up with them. And I remember we were struggling with this, and we were sitting in a room, Mark's bedroom, and a bunch of us was sitting back there brainstorming. And a guy named Chris McDonough, who had just started hanging out with us, he's like, what you need is like character classes like they have in D&D, where people know what a fighter is, they know what a cleric is and stuff. But we didn't want to be a class system. And then I think it was like Mark's like, well, we could have like these vampire groups of vampires, and then we have more clan and stuff, and all of a sudden, instantly when it happened, everybody was like, oh, there could be the trendy goths who go to clubs, and there could be the aristocrats. I don't know, we could have one that's really.
The true story of that, though, however, is that I actually had that in mind already, because it really is the same thing as the houses in Ars Magica.
Yeah.
That's true.
It's exactly the same concept. It's basically a character class that is society-based rather than job-based,
Right.
and it's a cultural phenomenon that is a group of people.
As an Ars
so
Magica
I
groupie, I
already knew I
remember
was doing
saying
something
that.
along that lines, and then he brought it up, and then I was like, okay, I might as well spill
Let's
the
throw
beans.
this out here. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, it did spell it pretty fast. It was pretty cool.
Yes.
I was one of those lockers in the Mall of Florida.
Were you 10 years old?
I was 13. And I had told my grandmother that I was going to a friend's house
Oh boy.
in Orlando, and we were going to go to the book fair.
Yeah.
A vampire book fair.
But my
fair of
actual
blood.
question comes from one of my friends who couldn't be here. He was at Gen Con in '92 when, as he tells me, Mark wrestled Watsy Hulk after the show, and he can't remember why.
I wrestled who?
He wrestled someone
Well,
Well, sumo
So-
wrestling with Peter.
Yeah, you
Atkinson.
Mark at a party sumo wrestled Peter Atkinson.
And the result was.
And by the way, as much as WotC fooled us with the whole, getting the IP, we fooled them in that we had this famous White Wolf party that got bigger and bigger every year. And Steve was like, Mark, it's getting a little expensive. And I go, no problem. Hey, Peter, I would love to co-host the White Wolf party. You can pay, and we'll invite people. Sure. A party, yeah. And WotC was rolling in the money, so it wasn't exactly a problem.
And
Well, that would
thus
have to be
sumo
93, 'cause
wrestling
92
broke
we
out.
weren't rolling
See how
money.
this
It was
falls.
like 94.
That was
Yeah.
it came a little
Oh,
later
yeah,
than
yeah.
94.
Whatever.
All right, any other questions? Yes.
Are you planning on doing a 20th anniversary edition for?
The new White Wolf is not here right now, but
He's directing it to me,
huh?
because we did all the 20th anniversary.
Oh, the 20th anniversary. Oh, sorry, the 20th anniversary.
We're not. Because really the direction that we're working with White Wolf is something that is in development right now. So if at a later time that's something that works with their plans, then we would be glad to do it.
So nowadays it's fairly easy to kind of stumble across the existence of Gen Con, especially as big as that.
Yeah.
But back in the day, how did each of you hear about
I could answer mine real quickly. Stuart told me to go. He said, we're going to get together, we're going to sell the magazine at Gen Con. It's this convention. I'm like, okay, what?
It was legendary
with
among
D&D.
gamers.
Oh,
man.
yeah, that. But I'm not, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, for Stuart and I, our very first one, we didn't come and have any professional thing going on at the show. We just came to play games. And so it was typical, read about it in the back of Dragon.
I was just gonna say.
And then I would say Dragon
Do your
Magazine used to
pre-reg.
publish the.
Oh, what event do you? Oh, I could finally try this game. And
I mean, they had the book in each, every year in Dragon they would put the pre-reg book in there, and you would read through it and go, oh my god, that looks so cool, and
sign me up.
yeah,
I
that's
think
exactly.
the first year we were all there together,
Yeah.
we played games all the time.
All
We
the
played games all the time. Every single night was a different game, and we played with Andrew Leaker, with Jerome.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
Oh god, the Druid guys back then.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
So much fun. And the second year, we played almost every night. But one night, we had some beer.
Yeah. Maybe one.
Yeah.
I went to Gen Con at age 16. I went by myself in my car. I slept in the car or under the bleachers. And I played an RPG tournament and won. And that was like a big deal for me as a kid. And, and I believe I did lie to my parents on where I was.
I won my first BattleTech, but I think it would just change from Battle Droids. Does everybody remember when BattleTech was first launched, they named it Battle Droids? Yeah, they had just changed the name. And I played in the tournament at Gen Con. It's good fun.
Yes.
You mentioned that there was kind of a sea change in the gender demographics in the years when Vampire was first introduced to the couple years after. Why do you think that is?
I think that there probably gaming was already poised for a change. I think women were already becoming interested in gaming, but there really wasn't this idea that that they would buy games and there was product for them. And Vampire was a product that women were very interested in, and it's a game they were very interested in playing, more so than most other games, and so it was the right time with the right product.
It was social.
But if it wasn't Vampire, there would have been another game that came along that women would have loved,
It was social, but it was also accessible.
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah.
people who were creating Vampire were putting, like you asked about the art earlier. Why did the art look that way? Basically because these were the people. They were going to clubs. They were seeing what people look like, and there were men and there were women and there were men and women and women, and so all of that started to show up in both the writing and the art of Vampire, and it was that much more real world effect to it that was using he she interchangeably, that sort of stuff where nobody was doing that I don't remember any product.
I also think that it was new, so it wasn't like D&D, which had multiple editions by then, and if you went to play as a woman, I was intimidated because
Sure, absolutely.
I was walking into a room where all the guys learned it when they were 10 years old, and they could recite chapter and verse, every rule, and if you didn't add your roll fast enough, they were right on it. But this was a new game, and everybody was learning it, so it was a real equalizer in that regard too. There wasn't a lot you had to learn ahead of time.
Yeah, also
to get in.
consciously, I did write it to try and get people laid. I mean, I swear to God, I mean,
All right, now it's out. Now it's out. Okay. On that note, I'd like to give everybody the opportunity to say what they're working on now, if you have anything to plug or anything along those lines. Where has your life gone since the heyday of Vampire?
I'll start. I'm just finished 2 VR games that are on Steam, and I'm working on augmented reality games called Shakedown, which uses your phone and proximity beacons. I also have a company called Make Believe Games. We did I Am Zombie, and we have something called Toxicity. We just had a Kickstarter for Unspeakable, which is a Call Cthulhu game, which sort of flips the story so that you play the cultists. And we have a Vampire, hopefully. We're signing the contract tomorrow. The Conclave is a new board game for Vampire the Masquerade, which should be out on Kickstarter soon, which is my masterpiece of games. I'm very proud of it.
Lisa, I hesitate to ask, but please.
I started a couple small companies, Wizards of the Coast, Paizo. Been a little busy with those.
Nobody said. we're very glad you took the time to come visit us.
Richard, please.
I started a company called Onyx Path Publishing. I'm the creative director and the CEO. We have the license from the White Wolf guys to do the very games I was working on all those years with White Wolf, our White Wolf. So we're also putting out our own games now, including the one we're having incredible success here with, called Pugmire, which is a game, a fantasy game of uplifted dogs who are mages and fighters and things like that. And it is amazing. We have one box left.
Seriously?
Getting shipped from my home because I took a box because I wanted it. And I said, if we don't FedEx this, we're not going to be able to sell
Wow,
this here.
amazing.
So it's been really great.
Yeah, that's very typical Gen Con too, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
I helped start something called Drive Through RPG. And that's been my passion for the last 14, 15 years
Long
now.
time.
Making that into something that can help the gaming hobby somehow.
And I'm the general manager of Green Ronin Publishing. That's what I've been doing the last 17 years. And we have a thing going on right now where we have released the campaign setting that Matt Mercer uses for his Critical Role show, and that has been like I haven't seen anything like that since Vampire or since Magic. I'm amazed by the passion and enthusiasm from these fans. So that's been my Gen Con, is like this tidal wave of Critical Role fans rolling over the critters.
All right, we're a little over time. I'm sure people will be milling around here, though. Thank you all for coming, and thanks to our panelists.